First Take Fantasy back today. I'm here with Tyler. We got special guest Grant Misemer, one of our boys, and he actually used to be a staff writer at Canes Insight. So before we get into the biggest winners and losers from the draft, Grant, I just want you to tell me about what you did at Canes Insight and why we should trust your football instinct.
Yes, sir. I'm excited to be here. I love the passion that both of you guys have had, building up First Take Fantasy over the queue. I'm just excited to add to that. While I was at Canes Insight, wrote a little bit on the recruiting end of things, also wrote a little bit in-season analysis. So the draft is something that, I look forward to every year, and I'm excited to talk about it with you and Tyler.
Yeah, especially with this whole quarantine thing going on, like this draft always felt like a light at the end of the tunnel, and like it finally happened. And as a Patriots fan, I'm satisfied, but as a football fan as a whole, this was an incredible weekend because so many things happened. A lot of things that I wanted to happen did happen, and we'll get into that a little bit. And yeah, just all in all, a great weekend. I thought the NFL killed it, and fantasy-wise, we had a lot of stuff to talk about. So really quick, I want to start things off. Give me your absolute biggest winner from this weekend.
No doubt you have to go Clyde Edwards-Helaire. When we look into things at Kansas City, that's just an electric offense. You have Pat Mahomes, MVP 2 years ago. But, more importantly, we look at the running back production from that position. We look at Kareem Hunt a couple years ago when he came in as a rookie. And, just looking at it from, a staff perspective, we always look at Andy Reid. And Andy Reid, throughout his years, has always been able to utilize the running back position. And, investing a lot of capital. I told you this earlier off the air when we were talking about Sony Michel. This pick reminds me a lot of it. There are a couple needs that Kansas City really could have gone after, but nothing overarching. They won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, it's still a damn good team in Kansas City.
Yeah, no, there was nothing that they had to do. They have a pretty stacked roster, no one that really left. And Hilaire just seemed like their guy, fast guy, pretty undersized in my opinion, but they have the offensive line to make up for it. And, I'm excited to see what he does.
Yeah, Tyler, you love this pick too. I want to hear what you want to say about Clyde.
Yeah, I definitely agree with what you had to say about it. I think it's a perfect fit for this offense. I think Andy Reid had some high praise for him after he drafted him, comparing him to Brian Westbrook. So I definitely like the pick. My personal biggest winner for this draft, though, is Drew Lock out of Denver.
Definitely.
So I think that with the weapons that he's surrounding him with, you start out with Cortland Sutton on the outside. They drafted Jerry Jeudy and KJ Hamler to this draft. It seems like John Elway's got his guy this year. So definitely love some Drew Lock this season. And with Noah Fant there as well, there's a lot of potential here for this offense.
Yeah, they really got some weapons. They brought in Melvin Gordon, offensive line got better. Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler. Year 2 and year 3 for Fant and Sutton. Things are really looking up in Denver, and I think they decided, although the defense is solid in the front seven, they just decided, they said, if we're going to play with Kansas City, we got to score with Kansas City. So that's exactly what they got. Speed, they got route running and everything that you need. So one thing I really like Drew Lock this year. I think he definitely has QB1 upside with everything that happened, and someone I'm really excited to draft. I think sky's the limit for him this year. It's going to be pretty solid. And Grant, touching on what you said with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, I definitely agree with you. I think the learning curve might be a little steep because this Kansas City offense is complex and they do ask a lot of the running back. But once he gets into it, I think he's going to be a locked-in RB1 if he does get that starter role like we think he will because he was picked in the first round. So, yeah, those two I really, really like. For me, the biggest winner, I have a couple. I think there's a lot of big winners this year, but my biggest winner is probably Miles Sanders. Tyler and I spoke about it on the NFC East podcast, but we were really convinced that they were going to take a running back by committee was going to stick. And although there are some free agent running backs out there, like Devonta Freeman, you could maybe even trade for a James Conner or a Marlon Mack, or maybe even a Mark Ingram, but Miles Sanders is going to be the guy there. He's going to get the touches, so I think he's looking a lot more like RB1 than he is RB2 this year. So someone I really like, Miles Sanders.
Yeah, I could definitely see reason why. Sanders, and you guys have said this before on the podcast, and, one thing that I just completely agree with and one thing that I love is, we vouch for good football players. You guys vouch for good football players. I agree with that. Miles Sanders, you look at what he did last year, and, kind of what we were talking about with Edwards Helaire. Like there is a learning curve going to the NFL, especially when you're a smaller guy. You're playing with bigger guys. You're playing with a bigger offensive line. The game's faster, but I mean, Miles Sanders showed towards the back half of the year, once he took out Jordan Howard for the starting job, what he could do. And maybe we'll see a parallel with there in KC, but yeah, I definitely see why Miles Sanders could be an RB1 this year.
For sure.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Miles Sanders. It's a kind of a situation similar to Clyde Edwards-Helaire, except there's not as much of a threat to his touches in Philadelphia.
Right now, realistically speaking, I don't see a threat.
Yeah, I mean, you got Boston Scott on the roster.
They signed my boy Adrian Killins out of UCF, but outside of that, is he nothing stopping him from getting 20 touches? And behind that O-line and with all the speed they added to that offense, the box is going to be empty. I mean, Miles Sanders, he might have literally just catapulted himself into the top 8 with this draft for me because he's so talented. So, yeah, Miles Sanders, someone I really like. Another player I want to touch on really quick, a running back I thought really won this draft is Austin Eckler. So I thought they were on the board. They could have taken a running back at 23. I thought that's what they were going to trade up and do. They traded 37 and 71 of the Pats, 2 great spots for running backs. So at the end of the day, they picked Kenneth Murray at 23, and then once they got to whatever their pick was in the 4th round, they took Joshua Kelly. No disrespect to him, but he's not taking touches away from Austin Eckler. I think he takes touches away from Justin Jackson. We might see the end of the Justin Jackson hype. But Austin Eckler, no one threatening touches. This team has a direction. They have Tyrod Taylor, and he's definitely going to be relied on to be one of the better playmakers in one of the better offenses in the league.
I mean, one thing just to ask, I mean, do you think that, I mean, we're talking about Joshua Kelly here, and, Justin Jackson was still going to have a role in that team. That's still going to be a pretty large chunk. Austin Eckler, even when Melvin Gordon was out, holding out earlier in the year, he didn't take a commanding charge in that backfield. I mean,
yes, like a 60-40, 65-35 split is what it was.
So, I mean, Justin Jackson still had some fantasy value. Do you think that goes away completely?
I think with Joshua Kelly, considering they really could have addressed other needs on this team, I think Justin Jackson's value does go down, but I think this really doesn't touch Austin Eckler. It's something that I really like because he still has that half PPR, full PPR upside. In standard leagues, I'll stay away just because there's not that much you're getting, but he really has 100 reception upside in half and full PPR leagues, and he's one of the most efficient players in the NFL. I mean, we've seen it the last 3 years through PFF. He's been top 5 in efficiency and yards per touch. So player that I like a lot, Austin Eckler this year. Tyler, what do you think?
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think regardless of who they were going to add, he's going to get about that 60% of the touches in the offense. And when you got a quarterback like Tyrod Taylor, who, I mean, they just drafted Justin Herbert, but we're going to assume that Tyrod Taylor is going to start, likes to target the running back position in the offense. I think going from Phillip Rivers to Tyrod Taylor doesn't really change much in the targets that he's going to get because, like I said, that he does target the running backs a lot. So with Justin Jackson, I think that even if he was getting the 40% of the touches in that offense, I don't think it was significant enough for him to have some fantasy value. So with this addition at running back, I don't think that it really does much with his fantasy value at all because I wasn't really targeting him in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, we always talk about, in the backfields, I mean, it's important to see where the rushes are going, but now in today's NFL, and especially with the way that fantasies play, most people playing PPR now, half PPR at least.
Yes,
I mean, you have to look at where the catches are going and where the receptions are going. And, that was going to be Austin Eckler in that offense. And then one thing, Gadiel, I wanted to touch on is we talk about efficiency. And, my guy Duke Johnson, in Cleveland, he was one of the most efficient players. I think this is a little bit different type of efficiency, though. Austin Eckler, the past 2 seasons, he's had over 100 attempts rushing the ball. And I'm not sure exactly how many receptions he's gotten, but, that number's up there as well. He commanded a lot of the targets out of the backfield, even with Melvin Gordon there. So, I'm excited. I'm excited for Austin Eckler.
Yeah, Austin Eckler is someone I really like this year, someone to look for in early round 2 of your drafts. I think he has a lot more upside than people think. I could realistically see a way where in PPR leagues, he finishes in the top 5, and I don't think I'm crazy for saying that. because everything's really pointing in the right direction for him. And to answer your question, Grant, last season he had 132 carries for 557 yards and 4.2 yards a carry. And he had 92 receptions for 993 yards and
Wow.
eight receiving touchdowns. So, I mean, the talent, although he was undrafted, it's really undeniable with him. He's a stud, and he got that extension, rightfully so. I really like him this year. So give me someone else you guys like. Tyler.
Um,
Thanks for the ambiance music. I love that.
Nice little cutscene, you know. Dude, what is going on here?
Tyler, you got to have a list that you could read off of. There's only so many players that won or lost.
Yeah, I'm just looking down. I was focusing more so on the losers, but another guy that I like is Matt Breida in
Dude,
Miami. I think it was a good situation for him to have the receiving role in that backfield. You got Jordan Howard, and now you got to switch up a change of pace back with Matt Breida. And I don't think that the Dolphins are going to be that bad this year. I think that they kind of
definitely not. They aced this draft.
Yeah,
they needed. They had a lot of pressure, and they killed this draft. They did.
Yeah, I think it's weird to say that the Dolphins won at this point. This is coming from 3 South Floridians, but yeah, they kind of killed it this draft. And I definitely think that there's some excitement for the Dolphins this year.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you got two. Yeah.
Yeah, I like
they added
Breida.
some offensive linemen.
Breida's a good fit. He's got – oh, sorry. I cut you off. But it's
yeah.
Yeah,
no, you're good.
Yeah, Breida's a good fit. He does have a lot of speed, and I'm interested to see how that's going to fit next to Tua because he hasn't necessarily targeted the running backs all that much, but that Alabama system is definitely going to be different. So Breida's just a very talented player, and I don't think he was given enough work or given the work that he deserved in that Niners offense. So I'm glad to see him get out of that mucked up situation, kind of RB situation I'm still not touching. And yes, he's going to share work with Jordan Howard, but in PPR leagues, he definitely goes from being someone that should go undrafted to being a pretty solid pick in like the 9th to 10th round and has pretty good upside. So yeah, I agree with you there. I like Breida this year.
I mean, to touch on that offensive line, they got some beefy boys, you know. Austin Jackson, you have to be excited about him at pick 18. And then you also got Solomon Kinley somewhere in the back. Day 3, whatever today was. I think it was somewhere in the 4th or 5th round. I'm not 100% sure. But, you know, he's a mauler. He's a mauler in pass protection. He's a mauler in run protection. He doesn't really get up the field as much as he'd like to. But he's the guy that'll definitely see some time. And then, I mean, Robert Hunt, I don't know too much about him, but second round pick.
He's a strong player. I saw a tape of him bullying Alabama defensive linemen when they played them. So, yeah, they came into this draft with a vision. They wanted to get their quarterback and then beef up front. And that's exactly what they did, along with signing Ted Karras and Eric Flowers. I mean, this offensive line could be very powerful. Maybe not next year because you still have a lot of young players there, but for the next few years, the Miami Dolphins, I think they're going to turn into an elite running back destination. Maybe add like Travis Etienne next year, but we'll get to that when it happens. So, yeah. Matt Breida, solid. Dolphins kind of killed the draft this year. Someone I really want to touch on, not being talked about enough because the team just had an awful, awful, awful draft. You can already kind of guess who I'm talking about, the Green Bay Packers. But they came into this draft with a very distinct need at wide receiver, and they did not address it. They got A.J. Dillon and Jordan Love, 2 players who really shouldn't have an impact next year. But I think the one big winner is going to be Davante Adams because we could see him get that 10-plus target per game role. I don't think it's crazy to think he's going to finish with 160-plus targets, and that's kind of what I'm expecting at this point. So right now, with everything that's happening in that offense, honestly, I might pick Davante Adams as my wide receiver 1 this year.
I mean, you know, he's also a guy that at the line just creates a lot of separation for himself, very similar to Amari Cooper. So, you know, you get a lot of open catches when you're Davante Adams. You get a lot of open catches when you're Amari Cooper. And, I mean, even Jerry Jeudy, if we touch on him later, you know, all those guys are guys that separate at the line. In today's NFL, it's very important to be able to beat the press, and Davante Adams does that very well. So, with that target share, I really do believe that, you know, he's going to catch a high percentage of those targets.
Would you take, with everything that has happened with the draft, the Saints, and signing Emmanuel Sanders, right now, would either of you take Devontae Adams over Michael Thomas straight up?
Maybe not right now. I still have too much faith in Drew Brees, and Michael Thomas himself is just an incredible player.
Absolutely. He's great. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, most receptions in the first 3 seasons of anyone's career. He got paid. I really don't think that's going to affect him, though. I feel like he's just going to be a baller way in and way out, you know?
So Michael Thomas, wide receiver one. Tyler, what about you?
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation because, you don't really add anything to the wide receiver corps in Green Bay besides Devin Funchess. So unless he comes onto the scene and unless he comes onto the scene and just like takes away his targets, which isn't going to happen, Devontae Adams is pretty set at getting around 150, 160 touches this season.
Touches?
At the same time.
Did you just say touches?
Targets. Anyways.
That running back
with that being said, yeah. Which is another discussion with AJ Dillon there. But anyways.
Yeah, that's another video.
Yeah. With that being said, Drew Brees is still fixated on throwing it to Michael Thomas throughout the season. But, if Devontae Adams comes back healthy, and it looked like he was healthy during the back end of that season, I think that he does have the potential to be the wide receiver one in this offense, even though it is a very run-heavy offense, especially adding in A.J. Dillon, who I think could be very good for this offense, but definitely takes away from Aaron Jones in this backfield.
So this backfield is something I'm staying away from.
Yeah. So I'm gonna go with you, Gadiel, and take Devontae Adams as my wide receiver one. Both are very, very, very talented wide receivers, and we wouldn't be talking about them as a wide receiver one if they weren't. So yeah, I'm going with Devontae Adams as of right now. Definitely could change. Definitely could flip flop. It's April coming on to May, but yeah, I'm rolling with Devontae Adams.
Yeah, for right now, Devontae Adams, I'm going to take him as a wide receiver one. And 2 players really quickly that I want to touch on. First, Carson Wentz. So obviously we talked about Sanders. This offense definitely is going to improve by adding Jalen Reagor and Marquise Goodwin. But I think the biggest winner from the quarterback position, although Drew Lock does look a lot better, we still need to see how he grows as a player. I think the biggest winner from the quarterback position is Carson Wentz, because now they have the speed at the X and Z position that can really take the top off of the offense. So now he has 2 players that he can bomb the ball too deep at any given play. He has Miles Sanders, who's one of the better receiving backs in the NFL, and he has 2 elite receiving tight ends in Dallas Goedert and Zach Ertz. So I think with all that together, I think we could see an MVP-type season from Carson Wentz. I'm not necessarily his biggest fan. Last year, he kind of pissed me off. But I am back on the Carson Wentz wagon. Someone I would like to draft in the middle rounds of my draft, maybe like 10, 11, depending on where he's going. I like Wentz a lot this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy that, coming off of, last season, he was healthy at the start of that season. But I think one thing to consider is his entire offseason last year was rehabilitating from that injury, coming out of dude, I'm getting my years messed up, but was it the 2017 season?
He got hurt 2 years in a row. So he had an ACL, and then he came back, and he had a back, like a vertebrae fracture.
He had the vertebrae injury.
Yeah, he was in and out. I think he didn't finish the season that year.
Yeah. He didn't finish the season that year. He ended up having to get surgery. And, a lot of that surgery, takes a big toll, a large percentage into the offseason. I mean, this year, he has no excuses. He's fully healthy. This team's trying to help build around him. I mean, besides Jalen Hurts, which, I won't really touch on that much. He's not very fantasy relevant to anyone involved right now. I love my guy Jalen. I think he just got put in a really bad fit. I'm sorry, Jalen. Sucks for you. But, yeah, in terms of Carson – shut up, Tyler. And in terms of Carson Wentz, just Carson Wentz in general, we see his ceiling. And we've seen what he's been able to do as a fantasy quarterback. And he doesn't necessarily have the rushing upside of some of these guys. But at the same time, he really could just pace out the ball, like we said, to the guys on the outside. And I think one thing to consider, too, is, we got a guy like Alshon Jeffrey that we don't know what he's going to be on the team. Even if he doesn't have a big role, just having another wide receiver, another weapon for Carson Wentz can be huge.
Yeah, they went from a team that had no weapons to a team now with a lot of weapons and a ton of speed. So Yeah, I definitely like what the Eagles did outside of drafting Jalen Hurts, although I understand because, like we said, Wentz hasn't finished a full season really. But, yeah, this team, they just got a lot better. And, Tyler, sorry, I'm going to cut you off on Carson Wentz because we need to speed things up. Last player, I don't need either of you guys to comment on this because it is a complete homer pick for my New England Patriots. So we went into this draft needing a wide receiver, according to the media, and we did not get one. So N'Keal Harry is someone that with the later round picks of your draft, like 13th, 14th round, maybe on, you could potentially be getting someone that's going to see upwards of 100 targets. So someone that could maybe become a flex throughout the season. They didn't address the wide receiver position. They only got tight ends, and I think that says a lot about how they think N'Keal Harry can progress next season.
I mean, yeah, this is a guy that, we saw at the beginning of the year, last year, who was hurt. And, that back half of the year really progressed as a player. And we saw him develop. We saw him develop with Tom Brady. Now he's got to do it with Jarrett Stidham. But, I mean,
Hey,
the
baby.
whole team for
Yes,
the Patriots,
sir.
the whole team for New England right now is, the young got to play and the young got to develop. And they're going to develop them together, I think, Jarrett Stidham and N'Keal Harry. So it's not a bad idea to draft a guy like that in the back ends of the draft. It's going to be pretty undervalued.
Yeah, I definitely agree. One thing I got to respect Bill for is that, with all the talk about Tom Brady leaving in the offseason and trading away Gronkowski, should be in rebuilding mode, Bill just went straight in, took every guy that he wanted. I think he drafted like three straight defensive players.
3 defensive players and then double dipped that tight end. So they came in with a direction. I wasn't sure what direction they were going to go. I wrote a column for Rising Football News, and I was talking about that they should go probably like linebacker in the first round and then receiver in the second round, tight end in the third round. And they didn't follow that. They didn't care. They went safety, linebacker, and then tight ends, 2 really no-name tight ends, although I love the Devin Asiasi pick. But, yeah, they came in with a direction, and I think we're going to see this team kind of morph back to the way they were in the early 2000s, where it's going to be a very physical, versatile, and athletic defense, and you're going to see an offense that's going to be kind of grind you down 5 and 6 yards at a time and hope that they can win games 10-7 because that's what it's going to look like if they're going to win games next year. But N'Keal Harry, someone that coming out of this draft, I have a lot more confidence in drafting him fantasy-wise.